Dear friends, welcome to my channel. This is Taras Berezovets with you. So, Yozo, over the weekend, dramatic events unfolded that will have a direct impact on the course of the war in Ukraine and possibly its conclusion. Because Putin was presented with another memorandum, the deadline for which expires this evening. In addition, the American leader Trump yesterday called on Zelensky and Putin to start negotiations in Turkey immediately without any preconditions. He wrote on the social network Truth Social that Putin does not want to sign a ceasefire agreement, but wants to meet on Thursday in Turkey to discuss a possible end to the bloody carnage. Ukraine must agree to this immediately. He also wrote that he is beginning to doubt that Ukraine will make a deal with Putin, who is too busy celebrating the victory in World War II, a victory that would have been impossible without the United States of America. Hold the meeting right now, he demanded this. In addition, the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, announced that he personally plans to go to Istanbul on May 15th, this Thursday, and he is inviting the Russian dictator to come as well. However, almost no one doubts that. In the end, of course, Putin will not be there. Putin is not planning to attend this meeting. Most likely he was a bois. He will send the same group that previously went to Saudi Arabia, his aide Ushakov, special representative, Kirill Dmitriev, and Sergei Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. By the way, today there was also a dirty scandal involving the Russian Foreign Ministry, which even forced the office of the French president to comment. We'll get to that a bit later. And now, here is Erdogan's reaction. Erdogan immediately called French President Emmanuel Macron, who had visited Kyiv just before the weekend. In Pattern edition, he stated that he is expecting Putin. Following the phone talks that Erdogan also held over the weekend, he announced that he would provide a venue in Istanbul for direct negotiations between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations starting from May 15th. Starting from May 15th, this means that Erdogan expects these negotiations will not end in a single day. They may last for several days. And apparently, this approach to the issue is currently the most appropriate. In addition, according to TRT Haber, Erdogan confirmed his willingness to further open up the possibility for achieving peace. And we can already see from the reactions of both Zelensky and Trump that this proposal has essentially been accepted. Moreover, this evening marks the deadline for the ultimatum that representatives of both France and Germany have given to Putin. This simultaneous ultimatum concerns the fact that Putin has until midnight Tuesday to decide whether to participate in these negotiations, to immediately stop attacking Ukraine and to declare a ceasefire. If this does not happen, then representatives of the European Union countries, together with the United States, will simultaneously impose a new tough package of sanctions against the Kremlin. The clock is ticking, is how Stefan Cornelius, a representative of the German federal government, phrased this statement, this ultimatum. He stated that the Europeans are waiting for the ultimatum to be fulfilled. If this does not happen, the Europeans will proceed to impose sanctions. Cornelius's statement came against the backdrop of a meeting in London of the foreign ministers of the geopolitical alliance in the Weimar Plus format, which was formed in February 2025 due to the new White House policy regarding the resolution of the Russian-Ukrainian war. It is time for Putin to seriously consider peace in Europe, a ceasefire and negotiations, said today the head of the UK Foreign Office, David Lammy. Putin naturally rejected this ultimatum through his press secretary, Peskov. The fact that Russia is completely ignoring the proposal for a ceasefire and continues its attacks was also stated today by Ukraine's foreign minister, Andriy Zebiga. And finally, the Elysee Palace, which is enraged by the latest fake statements and accusations that supposedly Emmanuel Macron, together with Keir Starmer and Friedrich Merz, used cocaine, also today, more on that a bit later, also today confirmed this ultimatum. Emmanuel Macron tonight announced that he would hold another round of negotiations with Zelensky and European leaders. The framework has been provided, everything is clear. Either Russia is serious and wants peace, or it is not serious, and we will have to impose more sanctions. He added that there are only a few hours left to make a decision. By the end of Monday, Putin must agree to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine. Since few doubt that Putin will reject this ultimatum. There is no doubt about that. There is also no doubt that Putin will not come, of course, to any Istanbul, since that would be completely contrary to his style of diplomacy. He has no intention of going there, as I already said. Instead, a group of trusted operatives will be sent: Ushakov, Lavrov, and Dmitriev. Perhaps someone else will join them as well. This means that either the European countries will have to move on to concrete actions. That is, instead of just threatening sanctions, they should announce the next sanctions package. Let me remind you, this would be the 17th package, which was supposed to be announced but ultimately was not adopted due to resistance from Slovakia and Hungary. At this point, it's necessary to decide what to do, as they say, in this situation. Otherwise, all of this will look extremely weak and pathetic. Meanwhile, Poland, without waiting for a decision from the Europeans, has decided to close another Russian consulate general. Previously, let me remind you, the consulate general in Poznan was closed. Now they are closing the consulate general in Krakow and have expelled Russian diplomats in connection with a major scandal. This concerns an arson attack, essentially a terrorist act, the arson of a large shopping center in Warsaw in May 2024 on Marvelska Bar Street. As stated by Poland's Minister of Justice Adam Bodnar, as well as the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs Tomasz Simoniak, the arson was specifically ordered and orchestrated by Russian intelligence services. We have detailed information about the actions of the perpetrators and their connections to a coordinator from the Russian Federation. Some of the suspects have been detained, while the remaining terrorists are currently wanted. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk also stated that this crime has been fully solved. It has already been completely proven that representatives of the Russian intelligence services were behind it. As he said, we know for certain that the cause of the large fire was arson ordered by Russian intelligence services. We will find all of you. Let me remind you, on the night of May 12, 2024, exactly 1 year ago, a fire broke out on Maryvilska Street, covering an area of 63,000 square meters. The businesses and shops of 1,400 tenants were destroyed. The fire itself lasted for more than 5 hours. The flames spread too quickly for it to have been an accidental fire. And now, naturally, we should expect retaliatory measures, the expulsion of Polish diplomats and, apparently, the closure of more Polish consulates. But in principle, Poland does not intend to stop there. They are acting quite consistently here, having previously, as I already mentioned, closed the Russian Federation's consulate general in Poznan. Meanwhile, Axios reports details about the decision made by Zelensky. On May 15th, he will fly to Istanbul for negotiations with Russia, even if Putin refuses a 30-day ceasefire, and even if Putin is not present in Istanbul. And I'll repeat once again, he will not be there. Well, that's practically a 99.9% guarantee. Nevertheless, this challenge voiced by Zelensky towards Putin creates certain additional risks for the Russian dictator, since in this situation he will, so to speak, look like someone who refused to accept the challenge. Yes, of course, one can say as much as they like that Putin does not give in to pressure, but nevertheless, this whole story, which is reinforced by the European ultimatum, let me remind you, its deadline expires at midnight from Monday to Tuesday. All of this confirms the idea that, obviously, the decision to finally press Putin to the end has been made. If you remember, in previous videos, I talked about how the result of the visit by Chinese leader Xi Jinping was precisely pressure on Putin with the aim of starting peace negotiations as soon as possible, which in fact is exactly what happened. At that time, Many people in the comments expressed skepticism and doubts, saying things like, what could Xi Jinping possibly have said? And in general, why would he need to do this? Some users even wrote that China itself is interested in the continued prolongation of the war, but this logic is actually incorrect, because for China, the current situation is quite the opposite. Yes, without a doubt, China is receiving significant benefits from the prolongation of the war, but nevertheless, it believes that this war is already starting to cause serious damage to its trade relations with European countries and to its economic prosperity, especially since, as we know, the economic situation in China is far from optimal. By the way, another indirect indication that China will play along is the fact that, unexpectedly for everyone, the governments of the United States and the People's Republic of China agreed to reduce tariffs by 115% for 90 days. In other words, all of this happens simultaneously, and it all needs to be considered as a whole. I'll repeat once again that there are behind-the-scenes agreements, and everyone suspects this. But here's another classic example for you. For Xi Jinping, this trip was important in terms of clearly conveying to Putin that China wants these negotiations to begin, and at the very least, a ceasefire. China is seeking, again, according to their own words, a just peace in Ukraine. But that's the Chinese perspective. We shouldn't interpret it exactly the way we would like to. In other words, the Chinese idea of a just peace is completely different from the meaning we in Ukraine attach to the word just. Nevertheless, there is another factor that is now seriously spurring the actions of the Europeans, particularly French diplomacy, which, as is well known, currently plays a leading role on the Ur continent. This concerns the fact that Macron and France are infuriated by the crude insinuations made by the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs through its official spokesperson, Maria Zakharova. This refers to the fact that European leaders, Macron, Starmer, and Merz, traveled by train to Kyiv on May 9th. Social media users noticed one of the videos in which journalists unexpectedly enter their compartment during the trip. So when the journalists appear, Macron puts away a white bundle, which turned out to be just a paper napkin, and Merz puts away a straw. Immediately, the official representative of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, came out and accused them of drug use, pushing Zelensky, I'm quoting Maria Zakharova here, into yet another hellish intrigue. A Frenchman, an Englishman, and a German got on a train and took a hit, apparently so much so that they forgot to put away their paraphernalia, the packet and the spoon, before the journalists arrived. The fate of Europe is being decided in every sense by temporary figures, dependent on drugs. Naturally, this whole story caused a wild scandal. The Élysée Palace responded by urging people not to believe Russian fakes and disinformation. Disinformation goes so far, they stated, that a simple napkin looks like a drug. These fake news stories are being spread by France's enemies, both abroad and within the country. We must remain vigilant and not fall for manipulation, the official statement from the Élysée Palace said. But obviously, in this case, Masha Zakharova has become a victim of her own subconscious. She has gotten so into the role, and drug use has become such a typical habitual activity in the Russian Foreign Ministry that obviously, when Masha saw the familiar image, a little bag and a spoon with her nearsighted eyes, an immediate association formed in her mind. They're snorting. It's cocaine. Once again, Masha's subconscious has completely given her away, and the images that the Russians are spreading in this context, including on Western social networks, with Macron supposedly surrounded by little bags of cocaine. I've posted all of this on my Telegram channel. You can follow the link and take a look. Naturally, all of this has played very much against the Russians in this case. I'll say it again, it is really spurring on Macron right now, and of course French diplomacy. That's how a personal grievance can hit back very hard and painfully. They wanted to insult, but ended up achieving the exact opposite effect, got something completely different. Meanwhile, interesting news is starting to come in from the Russian military command. It is being reported that the chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, Valery Gerasimov, is undergoing a military medical commission, what is called a military medical board in Ukraine. And within the occupying forces group, NEP, they are discussing two possible candidates to succeed Gerasimov. These are Colonel General Mikhail Teplinsky, the commander of the airborne forces, or Colonel General Andrei Mordvichev, the commander of the Central Tuzlo military district. Since General Valery Gerasimov is not only a personal friend of the dictator Putin, but also the ideologist of the beginning of the war against Ukraine in 2014, he also planned a full-scale invasion in 2022. This possible reshuffle, which has not yet been confirmed, is being reported by the Atesh partisan movement, citing its sources. Nevertheless, if we assume that this information is true, and this reshuffle does indeed take place, it will be a clear indication and signal that the Kremlin is searching for a possible way out of the war. Let me remind you, another figure associated with the full-scale war and invasion, Sergei Shoigu, was already dismissed a few months ago. This is important news. I'll say it again, primarily because it is a clear signal. Again, if this information is indeed true, a clear signal that, as we know, those who support the war and those who started it are always the first to be removed if there is a need to begin a scenario for exiting the war and seeking a peaceful resolution. Here is another very important signal. Meanwhile, Peskov has essentially stated Russia's demands for establishing a ceasefire. In fact, nothing is really changing here. The demand is to stop the supply of weapons from the United States and European countries and to halt mobilization and the deployment of new troops to the front. He also stated that Putin is not going to stop the war and that Putin intends to do everything possible to resolve the issue and reach agreements through peaceful and diplomatic means. But that is in their understanding. And most importantly, we are returning to the scenario of 2022. Specifically, the same demands that were voiced during the negotiations, which lasted until the end of March. I remind you, the last meeting took place on March 26, 2022, in Turkey, between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations. The negotiations were interrupted after evidence of Russia's brutal war crimes was discovered in the Kyiv region, particularly in Irpin and Bucha. These settlements became symbols of the Russian invasion and of the war crimes committed by the Russian military command and Russian war criminals. After that, these negotiations were completely halted and were never resumed. Moreover, Zelensky issued a decree prohibiting any negotiations with representatives of Russia, direct negotiations, that is, without intermediaries. And now this whole story will continue on Thursday, and unless the Russians do something to disrupt these negotiations, and that something could be, for example, a strike on Ukraine with an Oreshnik ballistic missile. Earlier, there was a scenario discussed in which the dictator closes the training ground on the 12th or 13th, meaning everything will be shut down, and supposedly at that moment a ballistic missile strike could be carried out, including against Kyiv. If, of course, this happens, then there will be no negotiations on Thursday. However, for Putin, it's not the first time he's disrupted negotiations and done everything possible to prevent any peace agreement or any ceasefire arrangement from being reached. So some surprises are possible in this case. Friends, we'll keep monitoring how the situation develops. Take care of yourselves. Subscribe to the channel, like, share, and comment on the broadcast. Don't forget to recommend the video to your friends. Glory to Ukraine, the armed forces, the Ukrainian special forces, and the territorial defense forces. Take care. Major Taras BEREZOVETS, Ukrainian Army. Friends, until we meet again, bye-bye.